Welcome to the Hustler's Guide to Flow. I'm your host, Marcia Miyake, leadership and emotional intelligence consultant, executive coach, and author, and I'm taking you into the minds of some of the most incredible leaders in the medical, research, business, and yes, even spiritual fields to equip you with powerful insights and practical strategies to level up in business and in life. The next level version of yourself starts now. Today's guest is Stefanos Sifandos, Relational Alchemist, coach, author, international speaker, and advocate of real masculinity, who facilitates transformational growth through neuro-empowerment practices, mindfulness, and who is one of the best at integrating Eastern wisdom and Western psychology to enhance the quality of relationships. His content is powerful, thought-provoking, and speaks to your soul. His programs include Conscious Warrior, Reclaim Your Kingdom, Conscious Relating, and he and his new bride, Master Coach Christine Hassler, have just launched a women's program, Be the Queen. Go to Stefanos.com to learn more about these transformational programs. Thanks so much for taking the time to come on our show today, Stefanos.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Awesome. So for people who aren't familiar with you, can you share a little bit about yourself?
Sure, yeah. So I'm in the space of personal growth, personal transformation, and it's a beautiful space to be in, a beautiful industry to be in. And for me, I really focus on cultivating health, greater levels of health and transparency and clarity in intimate relationships, particularly romantic relationships, but really any type of relationship, any form of relationship. So for me, it's important to gain clarity and health in our relationship to ideas, to relationship to ourselves, relationships to our belief systems, to other people, of course, to the world around us, to what's important to us, to what we value. And I spend a lot of time as well in the realm of healthy masculinity, what that means, particularly for men, bringing men into a place where they're connected to themselves, where they're on purpose, where they're clear, where they're strong within themselves. And they're also bringing that vulnerability, but more importantly, that authenticity, that realness to the world and to their relationships as well.
That's awesome. Yeah. So I had a look on some of your social media posts on Instagram, and I was just like, I absolutely loved your content and your perspectives on a few things. And I'm just going to read out one of your quotes. So you said, as a man, I wish to redefine masculinity and the art of conscious relating and communication and intimacy, which is awesome. What do you mean when you said that?
Yeah, so the way men have communicated, and this is obviously generally speaking, the way we as men have communicated for so long has been from a place of untruthfulness. It hasn't been from a place of transparency. It's really been from a place of self-oppression and suppression. We've really been in avoidance of what we've been feeling because we haven't really been taught how to feel. We haven't been taught how to emote. We haven't been taught how to express ourselves. So when we come from that place, there's a disjointedness within our minds and there's a disjointedness within our hearts, within our emotive being. And so the way we relate to ourselves and to others isn't really coming from a solid foundation. It's coming from shaky ground. And so we've either, generally speaking, of course, we've either been quite passive and meek in our behaviors, or we've been hyper aggressive and we've been oppressive. And so we've taken out or we've lashed out our insecurities or the confusion and frustration that we feel onto others. And therefore our communication hasn't really been effective and it hasn't really been real. And so for me, redefining the way we communicate and connect to ourselves primarily, and then bringing that greater level of respect and self-honoring into our relationships and into the way we treat others, especially our romantic relationships.
That's so powerful. So what you're saying is that men typically will be either really hard on themselves or hard on other people. So putting too much pressure on themselves and not being like open enough or being too aggressive on people. And so that's stemming back from, is it from childhood?
are you saying that this is coming from when they were young, they were never taught how to properly love themselves? Like, why do you think we have this issue? Because I totally agree with you that generally speaking, this is what we're dealing with. And to be quite honest, as women, we have similar issues. You know, with us, we're not expressing anger because we're not allowed to express anger because it's not feminine or it's not ladylike, etc. So we suppress in a different way. So do you think this is like a conditioning from childhood, or why do you think we have this issue?
Yeah, so part of it is gender normative conditioning, and that means that there's a collective systemic essence of how boys should be and how girls should be, how men should be, how women should be, how males should be, how females should be. And now we're moving into another dialogue, which is beyond binary gender as well. And probably that's a conversation for another time, unless you want to go down that path. But what we're seeing is that it's a combination of the way the collective views gender and views how men or how males should express and how females should express. And that word should is a dangerous word as well. And then part of it's also familial values or immediate conditioning as well. And then how we interpret those experiences that we have. And so part of it is that boys shouldn't cry or boys need an emote, and really boys should just get on with life and just be strong in the face of difficulty. And I agree with that. I agree with being resilient and being tough. We need that in today's world. We have to have every human being needs to have a mindset of toughness and resilience. And there also is a time where we do need to emote and actually express what is happening internally to us, so we can become accustomed to that integrity and that alignment. We can actually begin to really express authentically, as opposed to covering ourselves and wearing masks. And I did a video on this morning, the costumes that we wear, the unconscious costumes that we wear, and we don't even know we're wearing them. So we become disjointed in our minds. We forget who we are. We lose ourselves. And so a big part of this dialogue is saying that, hey, it's okay to have a feeling. It's okay to feel a particular way. It's okay to not have all the answers. It's okay not to know. It's okay to be scared. And there also is a time when we actually need to not be scared and step into courage, when we need to, there's a specific time to express a particular way, how you're feeling, and there's a particular time to express. So let me give you an example rather than being a little bit more general. So sometimes we need to be able to say and express in terms of emotions exactly what we're feeling, because if we don't, we hide away from that and we lose this ability to communicate on a spectrum, and our spectrum becomes really narrow instead of broad and deep. And then, so therefore we only come from a particular place of being able to feel. And so we limit our experiences and we limit the way we understand ourselves. Therefore we can't bring that into relationship. It just doesn't happen. It's really difficult.
Yeah, that's so powerful. And I totally agree. Everything is totally resonating. So I'm going to just step away from that for a second. And one of the things that I really love about your work is that the way that you really mix the Western and the Eastern methodologies, and really your perspective on a few topics that, you know, there's some discussion about, but I just really love your perspective, and I would love the listeners to get your take on it. So what do you mean when you specifically talk about the authentic self?
Yeah, so for me, I define authenticity or the authentic self, and it's a buzzword, isn't it, these days, the authenticity or the authentic self. And so for me, I define it quite simply. It's where our internal world and our external world is mirrored. There's a marrying there, and it's very transparent. And so what I mean by that is that our inner world, defined by our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions, our models of reality, our thought paradigms, our belief systems, when they are expressed in the outside world, they're actually expressed as they are felt or as they are experienced internally. So our behaviors, our expressions, the way we relate and communicate to others, the things that we say and the things that we do. So for example, it's not that I'm feeling really frustrated and angry and pretending on the outside that I'm absolutely fine. That's inauthentic. And there's a certain way to express as well, because I can be really angry and frustrated on the inside. And if I'm lashing out and taking it out, my frustration out on someone else by being short-tempered, by being abusive physically or emotionally, or being aggressive, I'm still being authentic, but that's an unhealthy, authentic expression, right? There's healthy ways to be authentic, and it begins with acknowledgement and ownership. So taking responsibility and ownership of what we're experiencing internally, and then developing and cultivating the strategies and the expression to be that in the world in a healthy way that doesn't harm you and doesn't harm the other person, especially intentionally.
I love that, because I think people think if I'm angry and I express anger, then I'm doing the wrong thing. But there's a way to communicate that you are feeling angry inside without lashing out. And I think there's a huge differentiation there. So I love that you touched on that. Totally agree. And you touched on this a little bit already, but I'd love to go a bit deeper. So what are you referring to when you speak about conscious communication?
Definitely, and I'll go into that. And so just to come back just a moment with the anger, this is really important, I feel. The healthy way to express anger, or an unhealthy way to express anger, is blaming and shaming, is externalizing our pain and blaming someone else for the pain that we're experiencing, because we take away the ownership for ourselves. And when we do that, we disempower ourselves because we're saying that it's someone else's fault, therefore I cannot do anything about it. I spent so much of my life doing that, just being angry at the world, being angry at people, being angry at things, and never took responsibility for how I was expressing and feeling and being, and therefore couldn't make any changes. I was completely disempowered. So that's a really valuable point to take into consideration. And so when we're speaking to conscious communication, I love this question. And one of the reasons why I love this question is because I've developed a model on conscious communication. And so the model on conscious communication is 12 principles. And in this 12 principle model, when I go into it, I look at it and I think, wow, okay, this is what's required to be a conscious communicator. This is what's required to step into a space of authentic conscious communication. And like I said, there's 12 principles. And so one of them is genuine query. So when we come into life with this childlike wonder and curiosity about what exists and what's possible, we're coming to life, we begin to communicate with ourselves and with others, not from a place of selfishness or entitlement or that we know everything, where we limit ourselves to more possible knowledge and wisdom coming through. We come with curiosity. So when we're talking to people and they're speaking to us about something that is maybe new for us, we're not sitting there saying, oh, I know all this, and we cut the communication and we break that connection, but rather we're open to what is occurring. So genuine query is about openness in heart and in mind, and really being clear about, hey, I don't know everything and I may not align with this idea, but I'm really willing to at least hear it and be open to it. As an example, that's one of the principles of my conscious communication model. I can keep going if you want, but there's 12, so it's quite a lot.
That was really good. I love that. Can we get one more of that one?
Of course, absolutely. Well, I'll give you two more, and just this one here. So empathy, humility, and true compassion. And so empathy and compassion essentially is a powerful modality for communicating because it places us in the shoes of the other person. It allows us to relate. So the more empathy and compassion we have, the more relatability we have, the more we can connect, the more we can bond, the deeper intimacy we share with someone else. Intimacy is a crux of conscious communication, aware communication. Another one is inspired playfulness. I call it inspired playfulness. And essentially what that is just about having fun. It's literally bringing a lightness to communication, whether you're conversing verbally, whether you're communicating through physical lovemaking, whether you're communicating in the various ways that we can communicate, verbal and non-verbal. It's bringing a lightness and a playfulness, a joy, a transparency to the conversation, however that conversation takes place. Again, this is something I'm very excited about. I like to create models. And so when I was creating this, I was thinking, how do I wish to be treated? And importantly, how do I wish to give to others? And giving and receiving in equanimity and balance, that's another component of the model as well.
That's awesome. I love that. That's really, really cool. So is that an online program that people can sign up for? How do people?
Yes. Yeah, they can get access to the conscious communication model on my platform through my website. Yeah. And I'm just in the process of actually revamping my website. So on the current website, it won't be on there, but in the next month or so it will be there. But mind you, I created this quite some time ago. I just haven't launched it. I haven't put it into the ether yet. Yeah.
No, that's awesome. Yeah, I really appreciate your work. Honestly, it's so amazing. Okay, so another unrelated question would be, what are you referring to specifically when you talk about sovereign leadership?
Great, yeah. So honestly, all I'm referring to then is taking responsibility for self. So leading self first. There's at least 50 forms of leadership out there. And so when we're speaking to self-leadership or self-proclaimed leadership, individualized leadership, we're talking about how can we lead ourselves through the world? How can we be the best version of ourselves for ourselves first? And again, I've developed a model on sovereign leadership. And so this one has 14 tenets or principles. And so this really outlines how can we be the best leader for ourselves and lead by example, lead by inspiring others.
Love that. Like being the change, whatever it is you want.
Yeah, most definitely. Yes.
Love that. Okay, cool. So now I'm going to go into a space where I think that you just got some seriously juicy content. I was like sending it to private messaging, your post, and people like, read this, so good. So we'll go into your whole notion of like conscious relationships and the whole intimate relationship side of things.
Yes.
So there was a terminology that you used that I want to make sure that I'm using your terminology because I think it's really interesting. Can you talk to us about what you're referring to when you speak about a sacred union?
This is one of my favorite topics. It's more than just a topic. It's an embodiment and a practice, like it's a living thing. This is a very layered term, sacred union. And for me, it's bringing awareness. Consciousness and awareness are synonymous with each other, but it's bringing awareness to the type of relating that we're engaged in. And it's bringing an openness. And so primarily what happens is when we're engaged in sacred union, we're asking ourselves a number of questions. The first is, am I growing in this relationship? Just two questions to the first part. Am I growing in this relationship because of how I am behaving and being and feeling in this relationship? And am I growing in this relationship because of how my partner, or depending on your disposition, if you're non-monogamous, your partners are behaving in this relationship? And mind you, this isn't limited to romantic relationships either, romantic, intimate relationships. This can be any intimate relationship, familial, platonic, etc., any relationship of great depth. But we'll use romantic because I'm a firm believer that romantic, intimate relationships have a propensity to catapult us into our own evolution and really express our potential. And so the second question is my partner growing? And I'll just use simple monogamous terms in this case, although monogamy isn't that simple. Is my partner growing because of how I'm behaving in this relationship and being? And are they growing because of how they are being in reference to this relationship and me? And then the third question is, are we adding value together in this relationship to ourselves and to the world, to the global community, to consciousness and existence itself? And for me, that's the foundation of sacred union, that right there. And of course, there's definitely more. It's not just that. It's not limited there. But that's the foundation. It's asking those questions and then living in those embodied questions. And then second to that, what follows those premises there is such attention to detail in terms of how we treat each other, how we relate, how we express, how we feel, how we move through the world, the decisions we make, everything that we do. There's such great attention to detail. And what underlines all of that is that there's a conscious and aware honoring of the relationship as a third entity itself. And there's a deep honoring for the people that are in this play, that are in this dynamic. And that honoring is deeply, deeply revered. And that is so sacred. And so when you come from that place, when we come from that value set, everything we do and how we are is completely honoring the relationship, self and individual. So we're stepping out of ourselves. We're stepping out of entitlement. We're stepping out of hyper-selfishness. We're balancing that with a selfless perspective. We're stepping far deeper into empathy and compassion. We're stepping deeper into explored, open, sacred sexuality as well, utilizing sexuality for definitely its physical presence, but also evolving sexuality beyond just the physical and inclusive of the physical as well. We're talking about cultivating deep safety and trust, being consistent in our behavior, practicing vulnerability. There's a play and a fun and a magic that happens there. There's a willingness. Willingness is a massive, massive component of sacred union. willingness to traverse our own pasts, willingness to be present to pain if it arises, willingness to celebrate joy, willingness to look at our own wounding, willingness to be tough and resilient, to move through pain and challenge and difficulty, willingness to explore the varied intimacy that exists in our human realm. So willingness to change ideas, willingness to be grounded in ourselves and be consistent with who we are and be self-honoring. So willingness to say no when we need to and willingness to say yes when we can. And so willingness and commitment is a massive part of sacred union. And so, this is something that I teach over many, many days in a deep immersive experience over a deep program. I'm giving you the high-level 5-minute overview now, but that's part of sacred union for me.
Ooh, you dropped so many bombs there. I don't even know where to begin.
Sorry.
That was so good. That was so good.
I think I need to get better at explaining myself and maybe not diluting, but just segregating the message. Sometimes my mind just is runs too fast.
No, don't do that. No, it's so powerful. It's so powerful. There's just so many gold nuggets in there. So for a listener, where to begin? So if they're in a relationship now.
Yeah.
And this is a committed relationship that they want to be in.
Yes.
For them to have this beautiful connection that you just described about, where there's so much authenticity, everyone is, willing to release ego and just show up and make those commitments and all of that. Is that something that you need to sit down and have a conversation and say, hey, we want to really honor this relationship? Where do people begin?
Yeah, they begin with themselves. Yeah, great. And sorry to cut you off before you'd finished. I just got excited with your question. So, yes, definitely have that conversation and revert back to conscious communicating, whatever that may mean for you. And there are many models out there. I don't have the only one. And so, firstly, though, we have to communicate that to ourselves. So part of sacred union is having that sacred connection and intimate connection with self. And so in order to have that, we have to equilibrate and move past much of our wounding. We have to move through our fears and through our wounding. Not every single person has childhood wounding or wounding of the past or trauma. And most of us have experienced some form of trauma, whether it be during our childhood, adolescence, young adults, etc. Not everyone, but most of us have. So it's becoming very real with that. So for me, I left most of my trauma checked at the gate, at the door, and just kept moving through life. I oppressed myself and in turn oppressed others. I ignored much of my own pain. I wasn't really connected to who I was. I grew up in a volatile environment, not knowing, it sounds a bit extreme to say not knowing if I was going to survive one day to the next. It wasn't that bad. And there were days when it was really violent, physically and emotionally abusive. And as a little kid, it was very scary. And so I brought all that trauma that I bundled up, placed it really deep, deep down in the unconscious self, and brought that way of being into my adult relationships and into the world. And so I would notice that my relationships would carry a lot of friction and tension, and I would be really agitated and aggravated, and I'd lash out. And I was just really reliving what I was familiar with, the patterns that I had experienced as a child watching my parents. And not only that, I wasn't able to express and emote in adult relationships because I was never allowed to as a kid. I was sometimes, but most of the time I was not. And so I brought these patterns in. So part of sacred union is getting really real with you and looking at the patterns that we have that are causing us friction, looking at the relationships and noticing, are there any patterns there that we're repeating that aren't really healthy and that are causing us pain? That's a great place to start in terms of unraveling the self. And so people that are in a relationship, they really need to say to themselves, am I committed to this relationship? And am I committed to traversing the unknown aspects of myself? And am I wanting to do that with this person? And the only way we can really answer that and really respect that within ourselves is if we value who we are. And so when we value who we are, we can then identify our own values. What's important to us? Is health important to us? Is willingness to be in relationship important to us? Is our career or our purpose important to us? What is our purpose and career? Is family and children important to us? Like really just getting clear on the values that we hold dear to ourselves, and then bringing that into relationship to see if there's observe and witness if there's a foundation, and then having those very clear those clear conversations with your partner and saying, hey, this is really important to me. Is it important to you? Yes, great. Let's continue the conversation. Yes, no. okay, let's continue another conversation. But not being afraid to have these very profound conversations that in one way or another are very liberating.
Yeah, for sure. I love that you shared your personal story about the upbringing you had and the fears and all that you carried on through into and how that impacted your adult relationships. I think a lot of people can relate to that. So let's say someone is now aware of their past trauma and is working to heal that. Is that something that they should try to do on their own? Just keep trying to be independently healing that? Or is it a sacred union with someone else that is also committed to their growth? Is that something that you can heal together? What's your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are yes and yes, no and no. And so there will come a time where we have to do some healing on our lonesome. We have to explore ourselves, whether it may not even be healing. It may be a great deal of fun and play and lightness that we bring into our lives. And so at some point, we need to do that on our own. Everybody needs singledom. Everybody needs to experience singledom. Being in an intimate, sacred union-based relationship may not be for everyone. And if it's not for everyone, or if someone says, hey, I don't want to be in sacred union, I don't want a relationship, I really enjoy being on my own, legitimately they just are not coming from fear and pain and wounding, and they just want to be on their own. That's generally rare, but that can be the case. So let me preface something here which may help. I got to a point in my life where after one of my relationships a number of years ago, it really unraveled itself. I was unfaithful in that relationship and really unfaithful in that relationship to the point where I had two choices: either continue down that road and probably end up dead, or because I was just in so much turmoil and confusion and pain, or really address this core stuff and actually let the trauma out of my body and really face some of the things that I had been in avoidance of for 30 years of my life. And so when I went into that place and into that space and started really clearing a lot of that and moving through the pain, it was deeply challenging and confronting and painful, etc. But once I moved through a lot of that, I became really clear, and I became really clear on who I was and what I wanted. And I couldn't vocalize that before, and I started to vocalize it. And I started to really own it and step into it. And so when I did that, I completely began to change the essence of my own masculinity, because I was looking at that in reference to how I was behaving with women. And I've got a background in psychology and philosophy and other mind-body modalities, I started to leverage that. We'll talk about Western and Eastern, and I've been studying Eastern mysticism and philosophy for 20 years. I started to leverage that and bring that together. And because I was coming from a clearer place, I was able to see it very differently. And so I got to a point in my own life where I was like, I have three choices here. I either disappear to the mountains and become a mystic and be on my lonesome, because I really do want to evolve my own level of consciousness and connection to source, and whatever that means, and just really explore or reconnect or re-remember who and what I am. And so the three choices I felt I had were four choices, was go to a mountain and disappear for the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. As an example, that Eastern mystic avatar, that Eastern mystic symbol or example. Or get hit literally by a bolt of lightning, and that would completely change my inner constitution, biological, spiritual, emotional, and I would just have what we call an aflat as a spiritual revelation and be in rapture and awe, and then begin to evolve in that way, which was, I don't know what, 1 in a trillion chances. I don't know what being struck by lightning and then that actually occurring to the physiology and spirituality happening would be. The third option would be just continue in my life, and I was really enjoying my life. I wasn't unhappy. I just wanted more, and I wanted to really grow, and I knew I was stunted by just sort of being on my own in singledom and being in the world of the world, doing what I was doing, or be in sacred union. Those were the four choices I gave myself. And so I sat with this for some time, and I realized that the quickest way to evolve and to take self from the ordinary and the mundane, and even the slightly extraordinary, to the supernova extraordinary, and to be of the world still, to be in the world and be in society, is through sacred union, is through intimate romantic relationship, because of what it can reveal and expose within us. And so back to your question, I made that choice. about being open to sacred union. The moment I made that choice, my whole life shifted. Literally within a few days, I met who now is my fiance and who we share sacred union. It was the most beautiful experience, and it continues to be. And by no means, like, our honeymoon period was literally 2 weeks. Don't think, Steph's been with his partner, his beloved, for a short time and they're still in the honeymoon period. No, like, we went very deep, very quickly. And coming out of that and moving through that, it's been a beautiful revealing of self. So my point is, we can learn so much about ourselves through others, and we can learn so much about ourselves through our environment and just being on our own. And so it becomes a personal choice how we make that. And yes, I do believe, as I stated earlier, that sacred union and intimate relationship is a gateway to greater revelation and greater consciousness and evolution of self and of humanity. Is it the only way? No. And I'm sure there are more ways than the 4 that I just mentioned. But for me, that was the decision I made, and because I was certain and clear on that, and that was part of my practice as a masculine man. A healthy masculine man was practicing certainty, practicing clarity, making a decision, being decisive, and following it through. The moment, whenever I do that, the world just opens up for me. Like, my life opens up for me. And so for me, I've had the deepest, grandest lessons, teachings, either now being in sacred union with my partner, with my beloved Christine now. And some of my greatest revelations have been on my own, though, as well. When I've been really going through the dark night of the soul and I haven't been in a relationship, and I've either broken up in relationship and it's been a catalyst for me to go deep into self and explore the chasms of my being, or I've just been on my own and I've made a decision to go deep. And so the answer to that is, yes, relationship can be a magnificent catalyst for growth and expansion, which I believe is the primary directive of being human, is to expand ourselves and grow, which is synonymous to love. And we can expand on our own. And it's necessary to do both, I believe.
Awesome. Oh, I loved everything you said. So with the sacred union, if you believe that you want to be in one, or you're in one, you're working towards that, how important do you think, because you were just talking about having, time for yourself, like, how important is still having that time for yourself and then having that time as a partnership?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because you're relating so much of your growth and, like, showing up as your most authentic self with this person and really working together to raise your vibration. How important is that? Okay, well, I actually need this time for myself, and is that up to the individual, or what are your thoughts on that?
Both. Again, and I'll share a personal story to give some context. So the answer is, it depends on the individuals. And yes, for me, part of the conscious relating model is giving each other space and also sharing deep, intimate contact time as well, having a balance of that. Now, the balance is really determined by the individuals. And the healthiness of the balance is determined by how deeply we've cleared our wounding or our pain around that. So I'll give you a direct example. So for me, I spent many, many years really searching for the approval of my father. I had a father wounding, in psychological terms, we would call that. And so everything I did, I would manifest outwardly directed success. And there'd be parts of me that would say, I hope Baba is really happy with that. I hope Baba is a Greek word for father. I hope my father is really happy with that. I hope he sees how amazing I am. I've built my body up. I'm strong. I'm fit. I've entered competitions. I've won. I've built a business. I'm international this. I'm doing that. Like, I hope he sees this. And a lot of that was unconscious. So I really went deep into that. And so I would always be wanting my father's attention. Now, I did a lot of that clearing before I met Christine. Now, meeting Christine and being in her personality type, it's interesting. She calls herself a cat and calls me a dog. You just think how cats are. Cats are very independent. They sort of come to you when they want. If you ignore them for a bit, when they latch onto you, they latch onto you. Then they want their space again. And me, I'm like a dog. Like, I just always want attention. I always want to give attention. And I love my own time too. Like, I can disappear in the forest, in the mountains. I spend a lot of time on my own as well. But when I'm with people, it's like I've got a bit of an extreme personality, right? But my point was that when I was with Christine, I thought I'd cleared a lot of this wounding, but I didn't. And so I would be really triggered by her wanting her own space and her pushing me away. And she would be thinking that I'm suffocating her because she experienced that with her mother. And so it was a match. There's a mirroring there. It's beautiful. So we can either do one of two things. We can ignore that and keep bickering and arguing and not get to the bottom of it, not understand it, or clear it up, get really clear on what's going on. Know that it's not our adult selves that are speaking and communicating. Know that it's our child self. And it's completely shifted now, where I don't come from that desperate energy of that inner boy not being nurtured. I come from me, my adult self, our healthy, strong, empowered, masculine man. And Christine does the same thing. Like, we would set ridiculous rules for ourselves. Like, I would say, we have to have this spiritual practice, we have to have this practice, we have to have this practice, we have to do this. So I was really in my practice as a man. We have to do this, because if we don't do any of this, then we're not in sacred union. And then what are we? Why are we even together? Like, my extreme personality comes out. And she was like, whoa, can't we just have some fun? And I'm like, yeah, it is fun. And it's like, and she would just set up ridiculous rules, such as, when I'm doing this, you can't talk to me. And when I've got this on, you can't speak to me, because she thought her autonomy was being taken away from her. She's been 9 years on her own, and her upbringing was in a particular way, and all these other factors in play. And it's like, whoa, we're just coming from pain and wounding. And we'd both done a lot of clearing. But that's the beauty about intimate relationship, right? It brings up a lot of stuff. It is the greatest teacher. See, I thought I was evolved before I met Christine. Very little did I know. Very, very unaware was I, and very arrogant to an extent. I wasn't coming from entitlement and ego. I just really genuinely thought, wow, I've got my shit together. I'm about to attract some healthy, and I did, and I do. I attracted a very healthy individual, very psychologically and emotionally, spiritually healthy individual, and stuff comes up, and we've dealt with it in a way that I've never had in previous relationships, because in previous relationships, it was all ignoring it. It was all pretending it didn't exist. It was all just arguing and arguing. Well, that's what relationships are like, No, they're not like that. Yeah, conflict is a natural part of life. Expansion and contraction is part of our universal laws, our universal principles, memorandum of operation. And it's how we respond to the contraction, expansion that we feel and experience in life that really defines our own evolution. And previously, for me, I was reacting to that, not responding, and I was reacting to it in a volatile, aggressive way, in a wounded way. Whereas in this relationship, if that comes up, I notice it, I take ownership of it, I'm vulnerable with it, I let the ego go, and we grow together, and we have had rapid growth because of that. And I'm sure there's more. We're not perfect beings, and we are perfect beings.
Yeah. I love that. And actually, a lot of that really resonated with me, because I feel like I'm very similar in my relationship as well. Like, I can really resonate with Christine, like wanting your own space and everything. And then the opposite is true as well. So what do you think, like, because how you're describing the sacred union, how you're describing it, it is a lot of work. Like, from the outside, it's a lot of work. But these two people that are, like, really committed to doing this. And do you feel like maybe it's just not for everyone, and that's why people really run away?
Yes.
When you confront that person where all of a sudden they mirror you. And I, like, as I said, I can really relate, because I feel like I'm in that right now, where it's challenging, because it's like, it's confronting. It's not always comfortable. But you can see that there's that massive potential for growth.
Yes.
And because we're both willing, we're like, okay, well, we're gonna make this happen.
Yes.
But in the past, and we both have acknowledged that we would run, would run. If we were in, like, if that kind of conflict came up or whatever, we would go back into the ego. We would revert to that 5-year-old who was not feeling good enough. So do you think a lot of relationships now, because we know the divorce rates, we know that relationships are, people's beliefs about relationships, as you're saying, like, relationships are always fighting, etc. Do you think that's because people are really, like, running away from the relationship that would really create the most growth for them? They're not with the right person. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so there needs to be a shared, before effort can take place, otherwise effort is dispersed wildly and erratically. Before effort can really take place, there needs to be a shared vision. And so in order for there to be a shared vision, we must communicate that authentically and with clarity. So we must know ourselves first. And the first principle for me for conscious relating is self-gnosis, self-awareness, self-wisdom. It's all encompassing self-realization, self-accomplishment, self-reverence. And so we have to know ourselves before we can share our vision with someone else. We're speaking about divorce rates, and everyone's very quick to blame, oh, well, monogamy must be to blame. That's not necessarily the case. It's not that non-monogamy is a superior and I don't want to go on a tangent here, but it's not that non-monogamy or monogamy are superior styles of relating, and that's what leads to divorce. It's that fundamentally is that we don't have clarity and we haven't cleared up our past. We haven't cleared up our shit is what causes divorce rates. And monogamy happens to be the mainstream vehicle by which we relate to each other intimately, and it probably shouldn't be. I read somewhere really interestingly, and I'll write a lot of this. You can go on my website. I've got many articles on monogamy and non-monogamy. But this gentleman who's a non-monogamist was saying that non-monogamy needs to be the norm, and monogamy needs to be reserved for those that are quite advanced, spiritually, emotionally, etc., because it does require a great deal of effort. And again, I don't want to go too much on a tangent, but I'll come back into this place of sharing a vision. And so when we share a vision with each other, it begins right at the beginning. And so for me, when Christine and I first got together, we shared a great deal about how do we wish to argue or have a point of difference? How do we experience conflict? What is some of our greatest wounding? What were some of our greatest pains and fears as children? How would we wish to behave as adults if we were to be faced with a difficult situation? How do we view gender? How do we view race? What's our take on family? We're just asking some really big, deep questions about how we would want to behave in certain situations and what our belief systems are around particular areas of life. And so when you come from that place and you can get on the same page and share the vision, it's a lot easier to exert effort. And the effort, the intensity or the difficulty or the challenge associated with the effort doesn't change, but the willingness to actually apply effort, that's what changes, because you're sharing a vision. Because you know this is what we're committed to. These are our values. These are our belief systems. We're in this. This is what's happening. If there's any changes, we're always going to speak about it. We're never going to keep each other second guessing. Therefore, you know what? I'm willing to apply effort in this area.
Yeah. Okay. So when you said that you and Christine, you guys had it was a few weeks and the honeymoon period was over. Is that because you guys said, okay, now we're going to do the work now. We're going to actually get to know each other and figure out, do we have aligned values? Do we have an aligned vision, etc.?
No, we did that immediately. So we were introduced by mutual friends, really good friends of both of us. So I was in Australia and she was in the US. And we were introduced, and long story short, we cultivated this beautiful relationship on WhatsApp. We cultivated this relationship over WhatsApp and just started communicating and talking and just cultivated a deep friendship. And so we asked each other we didn't have physical contact for months. And so we didn't have to, but we chose to go deep into our own intellect, our spirituality, our emotional being, our relational selves, outside of physical contact. So the honeymoon period and all of that just organically unraveled and just organically had its space. Like I still feel I'm in a honeymoon period because I'm in deep adoration and reverence of the woman that I'm with. But I also know, having experienced relationships previously, the honeymoon period is definitely over. That hormonal honeymoon period, that hormonal rush where biology has now really calmed down. And it happened very quickly with us. And not because the way we related sexually just died down, not at all. It's amazing and intense, and we astro travel, like in our intimacy, whether it be sexual or even other. Literally, it's amazing. That's without any plant medicines or without any external additives. And so it's really quite profound. It wasn't because of any of that. It was because of just the unraveling of what we exposed ourselves to in terms of who we were and what we wanted. We just got really clear, and we just knew there was a knowing there. There was a complete transparency and an honoring of truth. I chose for the first time to really step into truth, and she chose to do the same thing. I don't think it was the first time for her, but for me, it was the first time it really, really became very, very real. And I wasn't attached to the outcome. Yeah, sure, maybe I would have been disappointed, but I was more interested in bringing the fullness of my realness forward above anything else, to honor her and to honor myself.
Wow, that's awesome. So with your relationship, when you say that it's just so deep and intense and all that, do you think that's because of the prior healing that you guys both did individually, and then the work that you guys do together in terms of your spiritual practice and making sure that your relationship is the priority? And then because of those things, you can reach this level. Like, how does someone in a relationship, how do they cultivate that phase? How do they create this really, really deep connection where you're raising each other's vibrations and you're just like a deeper level of connection than maybe they even thought possible.
Well, to answer the first part of your question, yes. And so it was a combination of having done deep work as individuals and then being willing and open, which is a segue into the next part of your question, being very willing and open to explore the dynamics of this particular, this specific relationship that we share. And so part of that is laden with willingness, what I mentioned earlier about willingness to explore, willingness to be, willingness to, have the tough conversations, willingness to celebrate the joys. Effort is a big part of that as well. A value alignment where we both prioritize the relationship and we prioritize the growth of the relationship and the growth of ourselves, because we actually see that our relationship, and this isn't coming from a place of ego, this is coming from a place of everyone has this capacity, where we're just really owning it for ourselves, is that our relationship has a capacity to positively or negatively influence and impact others in the world. So how do we want to be? And making a conscious choice that if we place effort in our relationship in a particular way, it can really positively and healthily affect and impact those that we come into contact with. And so that's a very conscious choice.
Wow, that's awesome. So I'm going to move into another space that you talk a lot about and that you touched on just then. And it's the sexual side of the relationship. One of the things you said, it's beyond the physical, but also including the physical. What do you mean by that? Can you just talk to us, just however broadly or specifically you want to go into that topic?
So sexuality is more than just the act of coitus. It's more than just physical receiving and giving, penetrating of sexual organs. I'm trying to give a physiological definition here. It's just more than that. It is that. And that's not, when I say it's more than that, it's not discounting or devaluing that physical act. It's that, and it can be more. And so what I mean by that is that sexuality can, sex magic, we can create from that sexual life force energy. We can create what we want to experience in our world, literally. Not only in that moment, but also outside of that moment. We can use it as a sacred practice for manifestation. We can move into different psycho-emotional and spiritual states, even different brainwave states through sexual practice or through the practice of sacred sexuality. And there's so many layers to this as well. So for us, sexuality is a point of evolution, and it's just beautiful. It's fun. It's play. It's intimate. It's connecting. It's all those beautiful light things. And it's also depth. And the revelation, the insights that come, the wisdom that is obtained, like the experience that's shared at that level of intimacy, even just at that level of internal and or external orgasm, that there changes the way we relate to each other and to ourselves as individuals. And so sacred sexuality, if explored from a particular way, can be all of those things and more.
So sacred sexuality, is that something that is done in monogamy only, or do you think that it's possible through?
Yes, I believe it's possible through conscious or aware non-monogamy. Potentially it's even possible through people not behaving morally adept when it comes to sacred sexuality. Potentially. It has that gateway. It has that potential. I do believe, though, when we share sacred sexuality with deep and deliberate intent with someone that we are really connected to intimately because we've spent time and attention in that dynamic with that person, I do believe the sacred sexuality can be enhanced. But yes, these profound experiences can also occur from, quote unquote, one night stands. Absolutely.
So with that then, is a prerequisite of having these like really incredible experiences sexually, is a prerequisite of that the people have to be healed, or is that is completely separate to it?
That's a really good question. And I'll answer it this way. The greater level of clearing, internal clearing of the internal clutter that we actively and with deliberate intent move through, so our past wounding, our trauma, the more we clear the vessel, so at a cellular level, because science tells us at a cellular level, we hold trauma in the physical body. So when we release that, it's like we're creating a clear conduit for receiving and giving. So my answer, my response to that is yes, the clearer we are, I mean, that's been my experience as well, the clearer I am in terms of the healing that I've done and the moving through past traumas, the more profound my everyday experiences are. Whether I'm on psilocybin, whether I'm on ayahuasca, whether it's sacred sexuality, whether I'm sitting at the ocean in deep gratitude with tears coming down my eyes coming down my eyes, down my face, out of my eyes, because I'm observing the symbiotic crashing of the waves, just the rhythm, the rhythmic crashing of the waves, and I'm in such gratitude and in awe of nature. All of that for me has been amplified because I've cleared stuff from my system, physiologically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually.
Okay. And so for people to have this sexual experience, like let's say you're in a relationship, is that something that it can happen organically? Like, let's say you're just really connected, you're doing the work, and so
Yes.
therefore the result is we're going to have incredible sexual encounters? Or is it something you have to say, okay, we're going to create this, set that intention, and then there's practices around that?
Both. Most definitely both. And I believe, like anything, the more we practice with deliberate intent, the more proficient we become at that, the more exposed we become to that, the more open we become to that. Like anything, the more exposure we have to that that's deliberate and with intent, what we focus on, we become, the more that grows. So, but the answer, I believe, is both.
Okay, cool. Stuff is so interesting to me. It's like so incredible. Okay, so I'm going to segue a little bit and just I'd love to get your opinion or just your input on, let's say if someone's in a relationship and it's what they have. They're married, they're not going to get a divorce anytime soon, but it's just not what they hoped it would be. Can they get to a place of that we were discussing about with the something really beautiful? If it's just, did it have to be that at one point? And can you create it with someone you never had that massive connection with, but you're married to that person and you really want what we've just been speaking about? Really resonating. Like, I want that. But I married this person and we don't have that. Can you create it still?
Yes, I believe it can be created, yes. Will it definitely be created? Not necessarily. It may not be in that couple's quote-unquote karma. It just may not be the alignment, but can it be created? Absolutely. I've seen it in many of the couples that I work with. I see it everywhere. And I also see couples make tremendous effort as well and get really clear and do a lot of clearing of their wounding and their fears. And they come at the end of that part of the journey, they come together and they say, I love you, but, and they both say it, I love you, but, and they have a conscious uncoupling. And I've also seen this new spark just come into relationships and it's beautiful. So yes, it's very possible, but it's not always for everyone. And so whether or not they attempt to try and go down that path, that's an individual choice. And that's a choice that we should empower people with. We should never give them the answers and say, yes, you need to do this because you've committed to each other and you're married. And that's a bit dogmatic to me. That's very dogmatic. And so do I believe in effort? Absolutely. If there's alignment and if there's willingness from both parties, yeah, for sure.
Awesome. So how can people get in touch with you and work with you? How can people get in touch with you on social? What's the best way?
Yeah, so best way to get in touch with me is Stefanos Sifandos. My Instagram handles on my Facebook. My website, stefsifandos.com or stefanossifandos.com. And they're the ways that you can get in touch with me. I'm all over social media. Like in terms of I'm active on social media. I really believe in putting consistent content out there and really sharing my experiences, but also the wisdom that I pick up. And I learn from amazing people as well, and I love to share that too. And so, yeah, Stefanos Sifandos is my handle.
Awesome. So before I ask my last question, I just really want to honor you and the work that you do. Like, you were introduced to me by Dr. Al, and
yes, he's lovely.
Yeah, he's like,
good man.
Mars, you are going to love this guy. You're going to love him. And I started looking at your stuff and I just love it. So I just want to acknowledge you and thank you for the work that you're doing. Really stepping into that masculine space and really showing men that there's so much strength and vulnerability.
There is.
Can have depth, that they can show up as their authentic selves, and that that's actually serving everyone else more. than pretending to be strong and inauthentic.
Yeah, absolutely. And so just to add to that, though, what I call vertical vulnerabilities, and I teach this in the journeys in the course that I take men through, vertical vulnerability, where we're not just like a sort of scattergun approach of vulnerability for the sake of satisfying the ego or the wounded self. It's vulnerability for the pure sake of sharing and intimate connection and bonding and revealing. And vertical meaning we're coming from a place of confidence, self-reliance, self-assurance, certainty, clarity, willingness. And when we apply that to vulnerability, it's a very powerful posture. Yeah. And it's something that I teach in my marquee program, Reclaim Your Kingdom. It's just so important, vertical vulnerability for men. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. I love that clarification. So it's not just about being like vulnerable for the sake of your ego, but for the purpose of connection. That was fire. I love that. Okay, cool. So yeah, just your work is incredible, guys. You find him on Instagram. He has some really amazing posts. His content is amazing. You have to check it out. He's got really, really great stuff there. And so for the last question,
yes,
what is the legacy you want to leave to this world?
The legacy I want to leave in this world is how I show up every day. I saw a cartoon, Adage, and he was saying, we only live once. And his friend, the cartoon character, says to him, no, wrong. We die once, we live every day. And so for me, legacy is more than just leaving something behind when I die. That's part of it, but that's a small part of it. And that's actually defined by how I show up every moment that I have. And am I showing up in integrity, in authenticity, whatever values I have, whatever values I hold dear. So the legacy I want to leave behind is the impact I make in the most truthful way every moment that I interact with self and with others.
Love that. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, guys, I hope you got some powerful takeaways from this episode. If so, please share it with someone. And if you haven't done so already, please subscribe and review, as it helps us to spread our message of inspiration. Sending you so much love, and I'll see you on the next episode of The Hustler's Guide to